Hello and welcome everyone to Building SaaS on AWS, the AWS SaaS Factory show for builders of SaaS here on Twitch. My name is Anthony McClure. I am a senior partner solutions architect with the AWS SaaS Factory and your host for the show. In our show, of course, we always invite builders of SaaS that are either very experienced in building software as a service or are even just beginning to learn the process of how to design, build, and deploy software applications into multi-tenant environments. We do this, of course, by every week focusing on various aspects of building SaaS and bringing on experts to assist us in that and diving deep into those topics. And today, of course, is no exception to that, as I would like to add to the show here Ranjith Raman, who is a veteran of building SaaS on AWS. Ranjith, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, Anthony, thank you. Thanks. Happy to be here.
Awesome, great. And Ranjith, for those of you that or for those in the audience, I should say, that are not necessarily familiar with you, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and who you work for and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey everyone, Ranjith Raman. I'm a solutions architect with the AWS SaaS Factory team, and I've been with the team for a little over 4 years. Well, actually, approaching 5 years now. Oh, time just flies, right? So, um, and the AWS SaaS Factory team. We work with AWS customers and mainly AWS partners because we sit under the AWS Partner Network or the APN, and we help partners and customers that are building SaaS on AWS. We go in and provide help with design and best practices and basically recommendations on building good SaaS and basically accelerating the customers or the partner's journey, SaaS journey on AWS, right? So that's essentially what my team does. So happy to be here, Anthony. Thanks for the invite, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We have a fun show to get to here today. But before we jump into that content, I do want to give a big shout out to all of our viewers that are joining us here today on Twitch Live. For those of you that are joining us live, thank you so much for being here with us. Our comment section, of course, is open today. If you have any questions or comments for myself or Ranjith as we get into our topic, which I'll announce here in just a moment, please feel free to add those questions into the chat, and we'll try to get to them as soon as we can. While you're there, make sure and say hello to our moderator for today, Bill Tarr, who I see is already active in chat this morning. Good morning, Bill Tarr, and thank you so much for being here as well. And please feel free to utilize the chat and interact with us if you feel the desire. So specifically, what are we going to be talking about here today? This is actually a pretty important topic overall in the world of building SaaS applications and multi-tenant applications specifically. It's a topic that's near and dear to Ranjith's and my heart. In fact, we talked about this very topic at reInvent here last year. We had the privilege of speaking about this, and we thought that it would be important and really good for us to bring this to our wider audience here on the show as well. Specifically, we're going to be discussing the concept of the control plane. Control planes are a vital component of building well-architected SaaS. But let's just start from the very basics here in the very beginnings. And Ranjith, why don't you try to explain to our audience a little bit about what exactly is a control plane?
Yeah, for sure. So a control plane or a SaaS control plane is this sort of this layer within a SaaS solution that is responsible for like managing and operating all of the tenants within the SaaS solution. And basically the idea of a control plane should be or is to provide that single and sort of this unified experience across all the tenants in your SaaS system. So that's basically what a control plane does. And there are several activities that a control plane is typically responsible for, right? So if you have obviously within a SaaS solution, you'll have some kind of an onboarding mechanism or an onboarding flow, right? And provisioning of resources, tenant resources, and this could be different for each tenant. For example, there could be a tenant that is signing up for a particular tier or a particular plan as part of your SaaS solution or SaaS offering, and they may have like dedicated resources. Or you could have a tenant that is signing up for maybe one of the lower tiers, and they are in a shared environment, or they're pooling resources, right? But irrespective of all that, the control plane, should be able to, onboard them and register them, the tenants as part of the system. And then, you can think of control plane as this, almost like this layer that's on the top. And it's a single pane of glass, and it has visibility into all of your tenants and their deployments and their resources. And there are other things that we'll get into shortly, like metrics. Control plane is responsible for capturing metrics, and see how the different tenants are using your system, and monitoring, billing, and all that. We'll get into that. But if I had to give like a 1 minute or 30 seconds or a 1 minute overview, so that's basically what a control plane is.
So this concept of this single pane of glass, this looking in and being able to monitor and work with your tenants in this multi-tenant environment, do you believe that this is an important part of building SaaS?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's we almost, like we say, like anytime we have this conversation with customers, or just about with anyone that is building SaaS, is that we almost equate control plane to SaaS growth in a way, because once you, like I said, establish that onboarding process, that tenant onboarding pipeline, and you start out onboarding your first tenant, your second tenant, and subsequently, like, you reach like n number of tenants. And if you do that repeatedly, right, if we have that seamless process, we call it frictionless onboarding, right? And if you're able to do that repeatedly, day in and day out, that equates to, you'll see the SaaS growth, or you'll see the revenue increase, that hockey stick growth that you're typically looking for in a SaaS environment, or a SaaS, with your SaaS service. Control plane helps with that. Having a well thought out, well designed control plane helps you achieve that growth that you're looking for. Because just imagine that there is a tenant that is looking to sign up for your SaaS servers, and they run into all sort of issues, like there are hiccups, and they're not getting value from your system, the way they were hoping to. They might drop off and just abandon the sign up process, or they might just go to a competitor or a different service, right?
Sure.
So it is, and onboarding is such an important factor, and onboarding falls under the responsibility of a control plane. So, like I said, having a really good, well designed and well thought out control plane is it's extremely important for anyone that is building SaaS.
You also mentioned, that there are other elements to the control plane as well, and we'll be jumping into take a closer look at what that looks like in a moment here. But you'd mentioned metrics and analytics as well. I think these are key areas to actually operating, right, the SaaS business that you're ultimately building. And we like to talk about here at the SaaS Factory that the SaaS isn't just a technical solution, even though this show is very much focused on the technical aspects of building SaaS. But SaaS is really a business proposition to begin with, right? And for your business to be able to operate, you have to have visibility into what's going on inside of your application, of the solution that you're creating for your customers. And the way that we do that specifically in a SaaS is this concept of the control plane, metrics and analytics being one of those processes. But maybe we should dive in a little bit deeper here and actually take a look at what elements we actually have that actually make up the control plane, and where ultimately does the customer's actual IP, the application that they're building, how does it fit into this whole prospect as well?
Yeah, so I'm actually sharing my screen, so are we able to see that, Anthony?
We can,
Oh,
yes.
awesome. Yeah, so this is exactly what I was talking about, and sort of this almost like the segregation of a control plane and an application plane. So the control plane is where you do things like tenant onboarding and also things like tenant offboarding, right? Because these are all life cycle events, right? So you need to have a good, efficient way of onboarding tenants, but at the same time, there could be tenants that are dropping off, and for various reasons, right? In that situation or in that case, you need to have a good tenant offboarding plan as well. Or we have seen examples of cases where tenants are just upgrading or moving between the different tiers or different plans, right?
Sure.
So someone might be in the basic tier and they really love your servers and they want to move to to one of the higher tiers, right? So all those life cycle kind of events are a responsibility of the control plane. But besides that, you can see here, when you're onboarding, you're also onboarding that first tenant user, right? So you need to make sure and establish the identity for that first user, and also, that first user could be the admin user for the tenant, and then they could log in at a later point and add more tenant users. But that particular flow, that whole identity flow and user management is a responsibility of a control plane. And this could be an identity provider that the SaaS provider is hosting on their end, or it could be connecting to a tenant's or a customer's identity solution through some means, through SSO, right? Because you never know what kind of requirements your customers or your tenants might have, right? They might want to just authenticate against their identity provider, right? And identity is this whole section, like we can talk about it for like an hour, right? But so
Whole other
that's the
show
idea.
maybe on that one, right?
A
Yeah.
whole other show. Yeah. But then again, there are other important things like metrics and monitoring, right? So like Anthony was talking about, was just mentioning, you know, you, as a SaaS provider, you have to have an understanding about how your tenants are using the system's resources, right? Because you could have a tenant that is in the free tier, basic tier, that is just taxing your APIs and sending a bunch of requests, and causing noisy neighbor situations and impacting the other tenants in the system, and you don't want that, right? And it's better to capture that upfront and earlier, without letting that happen, right? So capturing metrics, having a good monitoring system, and also metrics might be a source into your billing system, right? Just how many transactions is a tenant and their users making at a given time or at a given duration, and that can be fed into the billing system if you're going for some kind of a usage or consumption based metrics or consumption based billing. So billing is a responsibility of the control plane as well. And tiering is something that I mentioned. Like, you could have tenants that are signing up. Tenants could have their own sort of requirements, and as a SaaS provider, typically we have seen SaaS providers, they offer different plans or different tiers, and the customers or the tenants, they would go and pick, and depending on the tier, um, their whole the way their resources and services are deployed could be dependent on the tier or the plan that they have selected or they're picking during the time of onboarding. But having that whole tiering logic, and what kind of tenant is signing up, and what do I do with that tenant? Okay, do I provision dedicated resources and EKS cluster for them, or ECS, or do I just have them in a shared environment or a pooled environment as part of that onboarding process? So again, that sits under the control plane. It is part of the control plane's responsibility, right? So there is whole slew of things here. Yeah.
So yeah, and in looking at this then here, we have this application plane, which of course is where your actual IP, the actual application that you're designing and developing for your tenants exists. And then we have this whole other section over here represented by this control plane. And there's also an admin console that I see here too. But just from my eyes looking at this seems like they're actually two full complete applications. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right, Anthony. Yes. And, as you rightly said, the application plane is where the tenants workloads are running, right? So this is where you have that multi-tenant kind of a system where where the workloads are running. This is where you implement isolation and all that good stuff. And then you have the control plane services. You can also maybe also call them like shared services, which are a set of services or a group of services that are not really multi-tenant. Like there's no multi-tenancy in a control plane. It's just all these services goes across all of your tenants in the system, right? So it's global to the entire system, and the control plane services, you can have a separate team kind of dedicated to that. It could have its own CI/CD process. It can have its own release cadence and all that good stuff. And the application plane could have its own sort of way on how you release updates and all that. Yeah.
So in looking at some of these elements of the control plane here, and I know we've been talking about them as we've been going along, but it looks like each one of these being their own little box here, make a good case for potentially being microservices or microservices for each one of these solutions or parts of the control plane. And if we were to dig into one, like you've mentioned onboarding a few times here, if we were to blow that up, what does this kind of look like?
Yeah, so I mean, this is like what you're looking at is like one way to do onboarding, right? So typically onboarding, there is some kind of an API that as a SaaS provider that you have exposed. And like we saw in the previous slide, you need to have some kind of a UI, some kind of an admin console where the SaaS provider admin would go in and then, sign up the tenant. Or there could be, we have seen SaaS, like even B2B SaaS have a self-serve sign up
process.
Yeah, where the tenants can go in and sign up. But assuming there is some kind of a UI and someone is entering the tenant information that flows in, it reaches the API gateway, and there's some kind of an API that's receiving the request. It's validating that request, right? And then this whole model is something that our team has been working on. It's using Event Bridge, right? So the whole throwing a message across. So the way it works is we have the control plane would have some kind of an event bus, and then the application would have something very similar, an event bus on the application side. And then anytime the control plane receives the onboarding request, it would set up it would capture that initial tenant metadata. There's typically a tenant management service, like one of those lambdas perhaps. It's capturing that tenant metadata and the request, who is this tenant, like which tier or which plan are they signing up for, and what kind of resources should we provision for them. Like all that metadata is captured, and then the identity for that first user is set up. And then basically the control plane throws a message into the application plane's event bus and says, hey, go ahead and start provisioning the resources, like if that's what the tenant is signing up for, right? So if they're signing up for a plan that requires dedicated resources, databases, compute, the application plane, or there's a slice within the application plane that takes care of the provisioning, right? And so resource provisioning, sometimes like even us, like the SaaS Factory, when we have conversations with customers, sometimes there's a confusion on like where does it fall under? Like is it
right? Is it control plane or is it application plane?
Application, yeah. So I mean, sometimes it could be entirely on the application plane side, but sometimes we would say it's partly a responsibility of the control plane in the sense that it is initiating that provisioning event, right? It's telling a service, a provisioning service, to trigger or start the provisioning process, right? So yeah, so that's and then once the application plane receives that event, it would go provision all the tenant required resources, and then once it is done, it's going to throw back a message into the control plane's event for saying, yes, the provisioning is done
and completed.
It's been completed, so mark that onboarding event as a success, right? And it is important to capture every single step, right? So every single action that is happening, right? Because there are, can we move to, I think we have a next, the subsequent slide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this one. And this is exactly what we were just discussing, Anthony, right? So there are several actions that are associated with a tenant onboarding process, right? So the first step is validating that tenant request, and then looking at what is this uh, tenant asking for, or what do they need? Like, what kind of resources do they need? But you can also see that for every action, there is a corresponding event. You record this event in some kind of a database, or some place where your operations team has visibility into, or has access into,
Mm-hmm.
so that they would know exactly like what's going on. And like we said, like having a good metrics and monitoring and providing that visibility to your operations team is extremely important,
Right.
especially if you're designing SaaS, right? So we recommend like just capturing every single thing that is going on, and in every single flow. And this is just one flow, like the onboarding flow, but every single flow should have robust and metrics collection, gathering, and aggregating them, so that some team, your operations team, can make sense out of those metrics. So
Makes sense.
uh, yeah, so that's basically what's going on here. You can see that step 6, at the end of the provisioning process, you'll have to wire up to a billing provider, right? So you might have your own in-house provider, or you might have someone like Stripe or some kind of a third-party provider. And once you set that up, you say, okay, the tenant has been recorded, they are registered, and they're part of the system now, right?
So I think this is a good view of a microcosm, right, of just one piece of the control plane. Since the onboarding is a really big part of the control plane, but it's really just one piece of it. There's an awful lot that goes into building out these individual microservices, whatever we want to call them, making up this larger thing that we discuss as the control plane. But we also have mentioned a few different times here talking about infrastructure and provisioning, and creating resources as needed as part of this onboarding flow. But in general, I would imagine, given all of these moving pieces, that there are probably different kinds of patterns for the creation of the control plane and the application plane that we could get into here as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Anthony. It's something that we have seen. Every single time we have conversations with customers or partners on this, right? And what you're seeing here in the screen is are some of the patterns that are quite common. In fact, um, the pattern that's more common that's not here is I think we have an example in the next slide, where it's an example of a single account, right? Yeah, the control plane and the application plane is part of a single AWS account. It could be just part of a single VPC, and some kind of a cluster, like it could be ECS or EKS. And then you have a control plane perhaps in one Kubernetes namespace. The application plane is distributed, like it's in different Kubernetes namespaces, right? So that's
Mhm.
and this is an example of an EKS or a Kubernetes environment. But you could have both the control plane and application plane sitting inside a single account, single VPC, and the SaaS provider, they might have some form of the way they might have deployed and come up with some kind of an isolation mechanism to isolate the control plane and the application plane. But some of the other patterns that we have seen is a multi-account, where the control plane is sitting in one account, the application plane is sitting in a different account. And this could be done, this could be a request because it was a request from the tenant. There might be regulatory or compliance requirements where
Mhm.
the tenant's workload should be running in their own um, account, AWS account, right? So that's a multi-account is something that we have seen. Multi-VPC, and again, when we go with something like multi-account or multi-VPC, you have to factor AWS limits, right? There are
Right.
always, and there might be, the thing is, there might be valid reasons why you need separate accounts or separate VPCs. Because of the reasons that I said, like there are compliance or regulatory, or there might be local privacy laws that is
Right.
driving your decision towards having these, but always factor in the limits that you might hit at some point when you're going with these. But multi-VPC, a control plane VPC, an application VPC, and the services running in, so that's a pattern that we have seen. And when you have different accounts, right? The control plane is sitting in one AWS account, and the customers, the workloads are running in their own account. You have to think about how do you connect those two accounts, right? So the whole networking side of things, comes into play here. Private link, the AWS private link is a common, solution for
Mechanism for
this.
that. Yeah.
Mechanism for this, where you're able to connect those AWS accounts. And the final one that you see here is, the tenant's workload. The tenant might want to connect to their workloads that's running in a data center, right? It's
Sure.
it's not even on the cloud, right?
Still,
So how do you
yeah, absolutely.
how do you establish that, right? So there is the control plane, but the application plane is just not on the cloud, right? Or there is a control plane, there is some slice of an application plane that's running in a customer's AWS account, but there are other services that are running on premises, right? So you'll have to have connectivity across. So there is private link from control plane going to the customer's account, but then there is site-to-site VPN from the customer's AWS account to customers' premises, on-premises services that are running. So these are all some patterns that we have seen.
So we got a great question actually from one of our audience members. Are we going to show an example of the control plane? Or we're going to keep this, more at an abstract level here today. And this is a great question. We have a little of both, to be honest. So we're going to be taking a look at a little bit more of these architectures that Ranjith is talking about. And then we're going to show a demo of the AKS reference solution, which Ranjith is one of the authors of that reference solution for the SaaS Factory. And that is a really good way for you to be able to actually yourself download the content, deploy it into an account, and see how an entire SaaS application is put together from start to finish, including the full control plane. So yeah, we will absolutely get to that. Thank you for the question there. As well. So speaking of that, Ranjith, some of these architectures here, I think we can dive in a little bit deeper and see kind of some examples of what they look like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like Anthony said, we have a little demo that's coming up shortly. And so what you're looking at is an example of a shared AWS account and a shared VPC. So where the SaaS provider in this case have decided that, well, I'm going to use EKS. So EKS, the Elastic Kubernetes Service, is going to be my compute, but I still want some kind of a unit of isolation, where I can have the control plane and then the application plane kind of segregated. And the Kubernetes namespace is a great way to do that. So as you can see here, the control plane is sitting inside one namespace. And then you have the services that we were talking about, right? So the onboarding service, and then onboarding does a whole bunch of other things like identity and all that. But then it kicks off tenant provisioning, right? And tenant provisioning, and this is just one way to do it. You could this uses code commit and the whole code build and Helm to achieve the whole tenant provisioning process. And the application plane on the other end, you can see that there are different namespaces, right? So for example, you could have a basic tier tenants all going to the pool namespace, and their microservices would be deployed into that namespace. And you could also have a model where you have, maybe for your premium tier tenants or advanced tier tenants, there is like different namespaces or separate namespaces. But the whole idea is to show, how we have designed the control plane and in its own namespace, and the application plane in its own namespace in an EKS environment, and how do you kick off that provisioning process. And a slight variation, and we'll quickly get into the demo, I think, because there are folks in the audience looking for
there are already begging for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just another quick one here too that maybe feeds into this, and that is are any parts of these control plane elements, standardized? Is it always going to be customized for the application, or are there constructs that are reusable here? And I think that feeds into the concept of the demo and the reference solutions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this is a slightly different pattern that we have seen, where the control plane is sitting inside one EKS cluster within one VPC, right? And that kicks off. In this case, the customers or the tenants, they have said, hey, we want our own unit of isolation in this case, right? So their workloads, the tenant one's workloads, are deployed in their own VPC, in their own cluster. And then you can see that we have used CDK to orchestrate that creation of the VPC of the EKS cluster. And then and you could, there are, other options, IAC or infrastructure as code tools like Terraform, which can do the same thing. Or there are like interesting projects like Crossplane, so where we have seen customers achieve the same flow as well. But then on the top, you can see that there will be some kind of a GitOps kind of a flow here to deploy the microservices within those different tenant environments, right? So you'll have, anytime you make a change or an update to the code, you want that to be deployed across all of your tenant installations in this case. And GitOps model is a great way where you'll have some kind of a controller, like like Flux or Argo CD are great examples that is looking at your code repository, GitHub, or wherever you have that. And then using Helm, you can deploy those changes into the different tenant deployments, right? Installations. So this is a pattern that we have seen. And then I think this is a final thing that we wanted to show in terms of slides here, Anthony, right? Sometimes we have seen that, and this goes back to the one of the earlier slides that we were talking about, right? So tenants, they want their workloads to be running in their own accounts, their own AWS accounts, right? So this is a pattern where you have the SaaS provider, the control plane that does onboarding, identity, and tenant provisioning and all that is sitting inside the SaaS provider's account. And then the SaaS provider would launch and provision, workloads and resources inside the tenant's AWS accounts. And there'll be some kind of an access that the customer would have given access to the SaaS provider in this case through like cross-account IAM role or through mechanisms like that. Typically a cross-account IAM role where the tenant, where the SaaS provider is able to do a certain set of activities inside the tenant's customer or the tenant's AWS accounts. And you can also see that there is an agent that
I noticed for metrics, this is another level of complexity, right? Because you want to be able to feed information back to the control plane.
Exactly.
In this case, the tenant's account.
That is extremely important, right? So you want to know, you want to have those metrics. You want to see how the tenants are using and have that usage metrics, right? So there is a slice of an application plane that's sitting inside the SaaS provider that has the metric servers, its own database, right? And that. The tenant's admin users might have access to that metrics. The SaaS provider's admin users might have access to those metrics and usage, right? And again, it's important in a SaaS environment, right? So you need, as a SaaS provider, you need visibility into how your tenants are using the system and using your SaaS solution. So these are all some of the patterns. We have a few other patterns, but I don't think we'll have the time to get into that. But even that is very similar. So
and looking at all of this, and I think maybe getting back to some of these questions that our audience members have put forward here as well. And while we're at it, for everybody that's joined us late, thank you for being here with us today. This is Building SaaS on AWS. I'm here with Ranjith Raman, who is a member of the AWS SaaS Factory, and we're talking about SaaS Control Planes today. But yet, so looking at all of this, Ranjith, the first thing that comes to my mind, and I think our audience members as well, is, my gosh, this is a lot of work, right? There's a lot that goes into building out a well-architected control plane. that is completely separate and independent from the actual IP, the actual product that you're creating for your tenants. So, what do we have, either through AWS or resources to help people to get started in creating and working with SaaS and making a control plane?
Yeah, so we have several resources for this, right, Anthony? We have so one of the things that the AWS SaaS Factory team does, is the team that me and Anthony we sit on inside, is that we also build like reference architectures and workshops. Um, we just don't stop at the conceptual level. We take it a step further, and we build those reference architectures. And this is from our experience building SaaS, from our experience talking with people building SaaS, right? And we have a reference architecture based on EKS, which is a few years old now. Like, it came out sometime in 2021. It is online. Like, if you search for Amazon EKS SaaS reference architecture, you're going to find that. And there
I think Bill put a link into the chat as well for that.
Perfect. Yeah, so that came out like about, I want to say, 3 years ago. It's been a while, but even there, like, if you take that, deploy that solution into your environment, you'll see the control plane. We used to call it shared services because they are all shared services at that point. We didn't call it control plane, but so you'll see an example of a control plane, application plane model in the reference architecture. We have reference architectures that are based on serverless, lambdas. We are building something for ECS. We have some initiatives that are going on within the team, which there'll be some announcements soon, where we are building something that's dedicated for a control plane, like where we get deep into all the control plane aspects. But right now you have access to all the reference architectures, the EKS and serverless. But what I'm sharing right now is we also have workshops that we have built both on top of EKS and serverless, right? In fact, for EKS, there are two workshops, and where we dive deep into how do you deploy, build and design and build a SaaS solution on top of Amazon EKS. And so what you're looking at is the one that we ran recently at reInvent, right? So yeah, so these are some of the resources that, and I'm sure Bill is helping with the links. If not,
Yeah, we got them there.
Okay, fantastic. So maybe we show a little bit of.
Yeah, let's take a look and see how this actually comes together. If you want to go over real quickly, just how this is put together, and then maybe we can show a live demo of this actually working.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, this is from the SaaS EKS workshop. And you can see that, to the right, where we call shared services, where we have it as shared services. So this is the control plane layer. And this is not a full-fledged control plane because, like I said, the control plane has other elements too, like we see on the, like we saw in the deck. So I'll make this bigger. Yeah. But yeah, so the shared services, excuse me, the shared services layer or the control plane layer would have services that is responsible for like tenant registration and tenant onboarding and capturing that tenant metadata, right? And user management, setting up the user identity. And then, then you have the application plane to the left where the tenant services are actually running. And this could be, just, you can pick any kind of compute, EKS, ECS, or just EC2, like just anywhere where you as a SaaS provider are looking to run the compute, or this could be in a different customer's account, right? So this is, in this particular example, we are running this in a single EKS cluster. Both the control plane and the application plane is running inside the same EKS cluster, like one of the slides that we saw. But you can start with this and use this for achieving a different pattern or different
Yeah, I think the good thing here, whether you're looking to do EKS, you're looking to do serverless implementation with these reference solutions, you have a place to start from, right? Especially if you're just beginning to learn what it takes to put together a control plane and an application plane. This gives you something to begin with, a place to start from, and to also be able to go in and see how it is that the solution architects on the SaaS factory actually put these elements and these pieces together. And as Ranjith said, we also have some exciting things that are coming a little bit later this year as well that will take these same concepts of these reference solutions and put them more into almost like Lego blocks that you can then put together and assemble ultimately the solution that you're looking for your own production environments. But yeah, so what are we looking at here, Ranjith?
Oh, this is an example. So once you run through the workshop and just go through the labs and all that, at some point, you will have the SaaS admin UI console. So what we're looking at is an example of that, right? And so remember when we showed one of those initial slides, we had something in orange, right? So the admin UI, which was part of the control plane, and this is a UI through which your SaaS provider's admin would go and then enter. So I can go in and say, okay, I have a new tenant coming in, and so I'll just say, I don't know, my name for now.
So this would actually be the application that the SaaS provider, the organizations are producing the SaaS software. This would be their internal application, almost like their back-end software for the.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So this is what the SaaS provider's admin would. So maybe they receive a request through a system or through some means, right? So they would go into this system and then they would onboard the tenant. Or like I said, like we were discussing that, right, Anthony? Like, we have seen examples where there is a self-serve sign up where the tenants would see a similar screen, maybe with some more options, and then they would initiate the onboarding of the sign up process. But this is purely from a SaaS admin's view, and you can see that there are options to enter different plans, and each plan might correspond to something.
Either features or availability, or even complete isolation, right? If you have like the platinum tier, where that tenant gets its own infrastructure separate from everyone else.
Exactly. Yeah. So in this particular workshop, the way we have sort of structured it is like the basic tier tenants, they would share a common set of services sitting inside a single namespace within an EKS cluster. But for a premium tier tenant, we are using Carpenter to spin up dedicated nodes, for that particular for those tenants. So right now I'll just quickly onboard a basic tier. So I'll just say 200 here. So initiate. Right. So this basically is going to kick off, a pipeline where we take this tenant and we make them available, and they're basically going to leverage the shared services or the pooled namespace the pooled environment that we have already provisioned for them. So there's nothing really to provision for them in this case, right? So it's pretty straightforward. And this is something as a SaaS provider you'll have to, because you don't want your basic tier users that are probably just trying out your service to be you dedicate a whole bunch of resources and infra for them, right? Someone has to pay for that. So it's something like you'll have to figure out. But in this case, so we have onboarded a basic tier tenant, and I onboarded a tenant right before the show or sometime before. So I already have this other tenant kind of open here, and this is how it would look like. Right. This is a really simple e-commerce kind of an app where someone can go and add a product. Or I think I received the email for the tenant I just onboarded. Yep, I received it. So this is all integrated with Cognito, right? So this is
using Cognito for the identity provider.
So when we onboarded that tenant, it created an entry inside. Maybe I'll show that. But let me see if I can log in to this. Okay, I need to log out of tenant 100. Was it tenant 200 that we onboarded, right, Anthony?
Yeah, I believe so.
I think so. Yeah. So there is a
default password.
Default password.
The Cognito did all of that work, right?
Cognito did all of the work, and Cognito, we have a policy within Cognito where we say, okay, you need to change your password. So that's why we are seeing the screen. So change password, and that's it, right? So the tenant 200 is in. They have access to the system here. They can start, adding products, orders, and all that good stuff, right? But you can see that whole we quickly onboarded a tenant. It just literally took, I don't know, a few seconds or less than a minute to onboard that tenant. And the tenant received the email. They were able to go back and sign in here. And then we were mentioning Cognito, right? So we have a user pool. So the way we have structured this is that, so we have a user pool that is shared for all the basic tier tenants, and for any tenant that are in the higher tiers, like the advanced or the premium tiers, we are creating dedicated user pools. And this logic again is integrated as part of the control plane. It should be part of a control plane where you decide, okay, excuse me. So the tenant is signing up for a specific tier, and then based on that, I'm going to either create a new user pool for them, or I'm just going to share a user pool that is already created. So in this case, since we onboarded a basic tier tenant, you can see that the user that we onboarded is part of the shared user pool, right?
Right.
And then there are bits that we can get into, but I'm not.
So
I just have
one.
Yeah.
No worry. Poor Ranjith. Ranjith is, really nice that he's here with us. He's actually getting over a cold, so I appreciate all the talking this morning, Ranjith. So getting back to the concept of metadata and metrics and analytics, we actually have a question that came in from the chat that's a little bit interesting as well. If I can get that to show, yeah. So, when we have applications that are being deployed here as part of your SaaS solution, and you have customers that are using those applications, and of course there's data that customers are going to be interacting with as part of however your application is being worked through. But we also need to capture metrics from those customers and have that tenant information available in the control plane for business users to be able to take a look at. But this question is related to customers maybe being hesitant to share app metrics with the SaaS provider. Is there a recommended approach to how customers should approach this? The SaaS provider should approach this with their customers?
Yeah, I mean, it comes up quite often, right? So there are, a lot of times customers, they don't want to share everything, but from a SaaS provider standpoint, they need to have some visibility, right? So they'll have to tell customers, hey, these are the minimum amount of data that we are looking for. I'm sorry, I had a bad throat and it's just coming back.
That's okay.
So there has to be something that the SaaS provider has in their contract where they say, hey, these are the minimum amount of metrics, and we are doing this for you, for the SaaS environment. Like, we need to know like how things are working. Like, I can understand if it's if workloads are running in a customer's account. Sometimes they may not want to share everything, but there has to be some metrics that
right.
That the SaaS provider needs, like for billing purposes.
Yeah, I would.
And things.
Yeah, exactly. And I would add to this, it's an important distinction that we're not looking to capture metrics about the data, the actual data that a customer is introducing or putting in as part of the application. We're more interested in the metrics that are related to the usage of the application itself. What areas of the application are getting used, what features, for instance, are being used by the customer, how often those features are being looked at how many times people log in and authenticate and how many users that they have as a part of their tenancy. So this is metadata that's related to the SaaS product itself and not the actual data of the customer. It's very important that we don't advocate and would never advocate for a SaaS provider to actually look at a customer's data, right? That kind of comes back to just security being job zero for all of us. And it's important that we document that information as well. In many cases, we're dealing with regulated industries, or in the case of pretty much any SaaS in the modern world, you really should be striving or looking to achieve SOC 2 compliance or ISO 27001 compliance. And as a part of those processes of implementing and working with those compliance frameworks, there are very specific requirements as far as what data can and cannot be captured. We want to make sure that we're staying within those bounds. So it's important, as Ranjith mentioned, that you identify the kinds of data that you're going to be capturing, that is spelled out pretty concretely in the contractual information that you would provide with your customers. And I would say that for the most part, if a customer is purchasing SaaS, there's a certain level of expectation and understanding that the data exists in the cloud and that the service is being provided by another organization, another company. And as long as that the trust exists between those two, we don't really see, at least in my experience, I haven't really seen much pushback from customers related to the kinds of metadata that we'd be capturing.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, especially if you're sharing, resources, and if the customer's workloads are, like, if it's running within the SaaS provider's environment, right? So the SaaS provider would need like robust metrics, because they need to know like what's going on, right? And
Right.
they don't want one tenant unintentionally, or sometimes even intentionally, you never know, right? Just do things that they're not supposed to do, and then that basically impacts the entire system. So you don't want that. But I can totally understand when customers are running workloads in their own account and they are somewhat hesitant to share application metrics, and in that case, there has to be something in the contract that says these are the minimum metrics that we as a SaaS providers are looking for. And like, we don't need all of the metrics, but these are some of the metrics that we need.
Right. There was also a question that came up earlier in the chat as well, and it was kind of related to this concept of the self-service onboarding, and we kind of just mentioned that a little bit here as we're looking more at the more traditional business to business SaaS, which is a lot of what we focus on at the SaaS Factory. But self-service onboarding comes up a lot in business to consumer SaaS, and sometimes in business to business SaaS as well. And really the difference just comes down to how is the tenant getting kicked off, right? How is that onboarding process initiated? Is it happening inside of the SaaS provider's admin system? So perhaps there's a whole sales process that's happened in the background where you've courted a customer, that customer's agreed to purchase the software. So now internally you use your admins to set that customer up in your SaaS environment. That's the way that we've kind of been looking at here. But in the self-service way, in a self-service manner, you would have a publicly accessible web page as part of your solution where your customer tenants can come in. And if they choose to use your service, they can select a plan or a tier right then and there. They can pay with a credit card, let's say, and on a subscription basis. And their onboarding is kicked off actually by the tenant themselves by using your website to initiate the onboarding process. The important thing to note here, though, both of them result in the same thing, right? In that an onboarding process is initiated, whether it's internally from an admin of the SaaS provider or directly from the SaaS consumer themselves, the tenant that's signing up on their own. An onboarding process is initiated. But that's the difference between the self-service, yeah. Anything you want to add to that as well, Ranjith?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, just one thing, if I might add there, is like sometimes, like even like when you have that self-serve sign up page, and the customer would go in, or the tenant would go in into the details. So that would, the SaaS provider might have some kind of a ticketing system where that request would come in, and the SaaS provider would do sort of this, validation, like if it's a valid tenant or what are they asking for, and then
Right.
there might be another step where the admin would go and initiate the so just maybe a check or a validation step that they might have. But no, I think you've covered it pretty well.
Well, Ranjith, time flies when we're having fun here. It's been a great concept and a piece of SaaS that we're talking about here in the control plane, but we are out of time today. I want to thank you very much for being here with us, Ranjith, for talking about this, going over some of these same slides that we presented at reInvent. So it's always great to get that additional content back out there to the community. Anybody else, if you have any questions, please feel free to continue putting them into the chat. Of course, take a look at the EKS reference solution if you're thinking about doing SaaS and EKS. If you're looking at serverless, again, we have a serverless reference solution as well. And again, be on the lookout because we will have a whole new way of building SaaS from kind of a reference solutions perspective that'll be coming out later this year as well, that we're hard at work at here at the SaaS Factory. But in any case, to all of you that are joining us here in chat, to Ranjith, thank you for being here. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time on Building SaaS on AWS. Have a good one. Bye-bye.